All right, what's up guys? Today we're gonna be taking a first look at two new paddles from 6ZERO. This is a Black Diamond 14 millimeter and a Ruby 14 millimeter. So we're gonna take a first look and let you guys know what we think. No. No. All right, so I've hit the Black Diamond a little bit now. And honestly, so far, it's not a huge difference between the 16 millimeter and the 14 millimeter. It's kind of the standard stuff you would expect. This has a little bit more pop. It's gonna twist a little bit more on off-center shots, whereas the 16 millimeter, it just feels a little bit more substantial. But right now, I kind of feel like I'm liking the 14 millimeter just a little bit more.
All right, so getting my initial thoughts here on the Black Diamond 14 millimeter. Straight away, I can already tell you this is not a paddle for me that I'm gonna like. Just the Black Diamond in general, being a fiberglass paddle, it's just way too much negative feedback in my hand, and I just do not like that feel. Now, that's just a personal preference. I know a lot of people out there who like to know when they hit off-center shots and they like that feedback, but for me personally, I just don't like that jarring feel. It kind of takes away confidence from my drops, my resets, and even my drives and overheads. So for me, this is just not the right paddle, but something that I did like, comparing it to the 11.624 Hurache-X 14 millimeter. Geez, that's a long name. Being a 14 millimeter paddle, I was actually fairly surprised with how soft it felt. It gave a nice cushy feedback to me, not quite as soft as say the 16 millimeter Ruby, but enough where I felt more comfortable with it than the 14 Black Diamond.
I think these are going to be two paddles that compete with each other quite a bit because they kind of occupy similar spaces. So this is supposed to be all fiberglass and it's a hybrid shape. This is elongated, but it does have the curved top, also 14 millimeter, and uses a hybrid of carbon fiber and fiberglass. So they're not exactly the same, but they are in a similar ballpark. This is going to be noticeably cheaper than the 6ZERO Black Diamond 14. I'm having a really hard time thinking of how to describe the ball coming off this face. If you've hit a fiberglass only paddles in the past, the only one I can really think of was that OG Franklin Ben Johns paddle. You'll probably have a rough idea of how this feels. It doesn't feel exactly like that, but there's a interesting sensation with only fiberglass that's kind of hard to describe. Like, it feels like the face pockets the ball while being a little bit stiff, and the way it comes off isn't as crisp or as hard as this. One is not better than the other. If you liked the 16 millimeter Black Diamond but just wanted more pop than what that had, this is a great option. Right now, if I was picking between these two, I think I would pick this. It's not that this is bad, and I want people to understand that, because a lot of times when people hear me say I'd pick this one over this, they think that means this one's bad. This is not bad. I just felt more connected to this. The ball felt cleaner around the edges, even though it has a lower twist weight. The power and pop felt a little bit nicer. I just felt like my strokes were cleaner overall with this than it was on the Black Diamond. So, if you're on a budget and you aren't necessarily obsessed with the hybrid shape, this could be a better alternative. However, if you like the 16 millimeter Black Diamond and just wanted more pop, then this is gonna be your option.
Okay, so my final thoughts on the Black Diamond 14 millimeter. Very similar to how I felt about the Ruby 14 millimeter, except exaggerates all the things I didn't like. Unfortunately, it's just not the right paddle for me. It has so much vibration, dinks, drops, resets. If I had to say a nice thing about it, it is that it does have a low swing weight, so hands battles are quick, and it does have good pop when you get in hands battles, so it's easy to finish those. But with all those drawbacks, I just couldn't play with this paddle personally. Now, I will say, if you are looking for something a little bit cheaper and you want a 14 millimeter paddle, this one, the Hurache 14 millimeter, I'm not gonna say the whole name because it's ridiculous, was fantastic. It's $40 cheaper. This is $140 without a code, and this is $180. It's 14 millimeter at a low swing weight of 117. It was quick, it had a decent amount of punch, and it just felt much better in my hands. Less feedback, less vibration. Overall, I personally think this is a better paddle and better value. Again, I'm not saying this is a bad paddle. There's gonna be a lot of people that like this. If you're somebody who is just all gas, no brakes, run to the kitchen and slam the ball, you will probably love this paddle. But for me, that is just not how I like to play the game, and the Hurache was much better.
Got away with murder. All right, so just started hitting the Ruby 14 millimeter a little bit, and it's kind of exactly what you would expect. It's a more poppy version of the 16 millimeter Ruby, and honestly, whenever you're doing a 14 millimeter versus a 16 millimeter, it's pretty straightforward. You're usually not gonna get a whole lot of surprises. You can expect that off-center shots are gonna twist more. It's not gonna feel stable. You're gonna get more pop, maybe a little bit more power sometimes. It's just not a whole lot that's different except for getting more pop, really. But what I will say is Sig Zero is starting to have some pretty stiff competition, and the J2K, it's been one of those paddles that's been getting talked about a ton, and I haven't gotten to really look at it until today, and I can see why people love that paddle so much, because I think after a discount code, it's like 140 bucks or a little less, and it kind of gets the best worlds of the Ruby 14 millimeter and the Ruby 16 millimeter. It has some of the pop that the Ruby 14 millimeter has while having the stability of the Ruby 16 millimeter. So it's kind of a perfect in-between of the 14 and the 16, and at a cheaper price, I have a hard time imagining that that's not the better option for most people. And one of the biggest things for me on the Ruby 14 millimeter is off-center shots on the 16 millimeter, pretty okay. On the 14, there is quite a bit of vibration, and it just feels like the drop off from the center feeling really good to the drop off feeling bad on the edges turns bad really quickly. Like when I hit right about here, it's not pleasant. And I'm sure lead would help fix that up, but when the J2K exists and basically has equal performance, if not better, is particularly for stability, I just don't really know why I'd pick this. But we're gonna hit it a bit more and see what else we think. All right, so one area I'm like curious to see here is in mid-court resets because of that vibration, which I'm really not a huge fan of on this thing. I'm kind of curious how the resets go. Right now, they don't feel terrible, as long as you're hitting right around center. But if I purposely miss a couple at the edge, like that felt really bad. Now granted, like you shouldn't be hitting here anyways, but I don't know. I guess when you're looking at a 14 millimeter like this, you're usually not looking at it because you want to be a reset monster. It's probably because you want pop for hands battles or driving a little better. If we bust out the J2K again, see how this does. Right away with the J2K, it just feels more forgiving. Like those off-center shots do not feel nearly as bad. And now, some people like knowing when they hit the ball bad. Like that's something they actually want in a paddle. I'm not someone who likes that. I like as far out to the edges to feel forgiving as I can, but some people really want to know when they miss the center.
All right, so I just got done destroying Chris in skinny singles.
Oh, he doesn't want it.
The 16 is a very plush feel, definitely a little bit better off-center shots. The 14 does have a little bit extra pop, but that sweet spot has shrunk a noticeable amount to me. Off-center shots feel noticeably worse. So when I'm resetting the mid-court and hands battles, if I do not crisp hit it in the center, I am feeling that drastically twist in my hand, and I just do not like that feel. So far, one thing I do like is the hand speed is definitely better in hands battles, and that little extra pop is very nice when you get into a hands battle. If they leave a little bit of a sitter, just an easy put away with the 14, where the 16, I feel like I have to use a little bit more effort. But once you get away from hands battles in the kitchen, I feel like I kind of lose that. Like when I'm in the mid-court, I had to really think about how I was hitting my shots. Otherwise, I would just dump in the net or pop it up way too high. I just don't like having to think about it that much, where the 16 gives me way more confidence. Added some lead tape to the bottom. I added 6 grams to each side down at the throat, and that did help a little bit with the stability and the vibration, but not enough to where I would feel comfortable using this in a tournament or something. I still feel like I lack the confidence on my drops and my resets. it just is a little bit less consistent for me than the 16.
Okay guys, so it's a few days later and I actually took out the Ruby and the Black Diamond 14mm on a second day to play a bunch of games with people, and I have some extra thoughts that I wanted to share. The first thing that I want to point out is, what are the advantages of a 14mm paddle? Usually if you're playing with a 14mm paddle, there's two primary reasons that you want it. It's because you have faster hand speed and because you get more pop from the paddle. Now, the disadvantages are that it's going to be less stable, they usually vibrate more, and oftentimes it takes a higher level player to use it effectively because you'll probably be popping up the ball more. And now with how good paddles have gotten in recent times, it's not that 14mm paddles are pointless. There are definitely thin paddles out there that have very big advantages, but I don't know that the Black Diamond 14 and the Ruby 14 have those advantages. So I'm going to compare the Ruby 14mm to the J2K, which is a 16mm paddle. Now you might be going, why are we comparing a 14mm and a 16mm paddle? And really what we should be comparing is what the outputs of a paddle are, not whether they're both 14mm or not. Because after today, and I did a bunch of games with the J2K and the Ruby, the J2K has similar levels of pop, similar levels of power, but significantly more stability. Like, those off-center shots are not nearly as much of a problem on the J2K. So to me, it just makes me go, why would I choose a 14mm paddle when I have a 16mm paddle that gives me the advantages of that 14mm, but with the added benefit of more stability and more forgiveness? Even if you're comparing hand speed, the J2K comes in around like 113 and the Ruby 14 is like 112. So even with the faster hand speed, there's not much of an advantage. Other than that, the 14mm might be a tiny bit quicker through the air since there's, it's not as thick. So in this specific context, I really see no reason to choose the Ruby 14mm over the J2K. The J2K is also cheaper. And if you wanted something with even more power than the J2K or the Ruby 14mm, you could look at the AZUL 16mm, which has similar benefits as the J2K over the Ruby 14. More stability, more pop, more power, honestly easier to control for me because of that stability. So again, with both of those, why would I pick a Ruby 14? Now look, I'm sure there are gonna be some of you out there who buy the Ruby 14mm and you're gonna absolutely love it. And honestly, that's great for you and I'm happy and I hope that works out. But the only person I can really think to recommend the Ruby 14mm to is people who already loved the 16mm and were looking forward to or anticipating the 14mm Ruby from 6.0. If you weren't one of those people who were already anticipating one of those, then I think the other paddles I mentioned are probably a better fit. But if you were one of those people looking forward to a Ruby 14mm, then my guess is it's gonna fit great and you're probably gonna enjoy the paddle. Now finally, while I was testing the J2K, I had set my Ruby down and my friend just completely unprompted picked it up. I was not sharing my thoughts about the paddles during these play tests. It was just some friends. And he picked up the Ruby. He literally played 1 point and goes, holy crap, the vibrations on that thing are awful. I'm putting that down. So completely unprompted. I didn't say anything about, man, the stability on this is bad, or man, it vibrates. So the fact that someone else unprompted had a similar thought as me feels pretty telling. Now, I also want to encourage you guys to go watch other reviews of these paddles because I can almost guarantee that I'm going to have the most polarized take on these paddles. I'm willing to bet you there's going to be reviews that say these are great and that people like them, and I don't think they're even wrong. I think what people often forget with paddle reviews is there is a lot of subjectivity, right? In my reviews, I try and state what is my opinion versus what is fact, such as like swing weight, RPMs, twist weight, and all of those things. But at the end of the day, every paddle is going to feel a little bit different to other people. So I would highly encourage you to go watch other reviews and then form an opinion from all of that and decide whether you think it's for you or not. Because objectively, these aren't bad paddles. We're not talking like it's an Adidas Metal Bone or a Franklin STK. These aren't anywhere near those levels. But when you're comparing it to some of these other high tier paddles that some of them even cost a little bit less, that's kind of what's forming my opinion of why I would choose those over these. So anyways, all of that to say, just check out some other reviews and see what people are thinking, because my opinion does not need to be the end all be all. Now, for the Black Diamond, I had similar things whenever I compared it to the Hurache-X Control Plus 14mm. And I realized it's not a perfectly fair comparison, right? You're talking about an elongated paddle versus a hybrid. The hybrid only has fiberglass, and the elongated has carbon fiber and fiberglass. But I still feel like they're close enough that you can compare. And every single time I picked up the Hurache-X, I had way more fun and way more confidence with that. I had similar complaints with the Black Diamond as I did with the Ruby. The off-center shots and the lack of stability were driving me absolutely insane. And even though the twist weight is higher on that than the Hurache-X, I had such an easier time resetting with the Hurache-X. Now, it's still a 14mm. It still had a harder time than, say, a 16mm. But if I had to pick to go to a tournament, it wouldn't even be close. I would pick that Hurache-X 14mm over the Black Diamond 14. So just know that if you're not completely attached to the hybrid shape, that the Hurache-X 14mm might be a decent option. It still feels a bit different than the Black Diamond. Honestly, I think the Black Diamond has one of the most unique feels of any of the current paddles on the market, which isn't particularly for me, and I really can't find a good way to describe it. Over the last few days, I've really been trying to think, how can I explain it? And the best description that I can give, and I'm not even sure that this is the best one to give, is that it feels like the ball sinks in and is plush, and then beneath that plush layer is a really firm layer that it hits really quickly and then feels like more abrupt. So it's like soft layer feels okay, and then once it goes a little further, it's like, ooh, I didn't really like how that felt. And now there's plenty of people who like the Black Diamond. I know it's actually quite popular throughout my Discord. Kind of feels like a thin mattress layer over a plank of wood or something. Like it just doesn't feel good to me. I'm gonna end the video with this. Sig Zero makes totally fine paddles, and in fact, they've made one of my all-time favorite paddles, the Double Black Diamond. But of the 14mm options I've hit from other companies, like these were very, very low on my list of paddles I would choose. In fact, I would probably never choose to go to a tournament with either of them. Does that mean they're not a fit for you? No, but if you're similar to me or you care about my opinion at all, that's what I feel about them. There you guys go. Hope you enjoyed the first look, and we'll catch you in the next one.